All right, I'm ready. Good afternoon, Kentucky Realtor family. Washington, D.C., New York, Minneapolis, Seattle, Ferguson, Cincinnati, Louisville, Lexington, St. Matthews, and Prospect all have something in common. Across our nation and cities and states, people are protesting. It's not just the police because it's not about all the officers. Let's be clear, there are good and bad officers in their system. But in the cases of George Floyd, as we watched the Black man being killed in front of our eyes, and locally, Breonna Taylor killed in her home, these are just results of systematic injustice. Injustice is so deeply ingrained in our system that it happens over and over again. As a matter of fact, it all kind of looks normal at some point. We cancel these injustices out of our minds because the officers justify their actions with the charge of something rightfully so, and other times fabricated. Their actions harm, take the lives, or mentally destroy people of color more than any other group. Yes, it happens to all races, but over and over disproportionately, it happens to people of color. That's simply racism. Recent acts may be the straw that camel's back. After years of it happening over and over, people of color feel the weight of it. Even a dog, while backed in a corner, will eventually fight its way out. When people get tired and have little or no hope, they too explode. When you lose faith in a system, particularly one that's supposed to protect you or work for you, you too would lash out. When we see or we hear something that's not right, our silence means acceptance of what the status quo is and acceptance of what we think is normal. We may know it's not right, but it feels or sounds normal. Then you lose faith in the system. You can't stand by and silently watch because you think that it does not affect you. I'll let you know right now that it does. How did we, Kentucky Realtors, get to this conversation today? Question is, are we in our lane? From the emails, texts, and calls that I've received, this conversation has probably been a long time coming. Let me tell you that your president appointed group struggled with doing this. We met nearly every week to plan and give you what we think would help each of you. A couple of weeks ago, it was our health and mental wellness. Ultimately, we agreed to do this conversation because it's where we are right now. We expect today to have an open dialogue and conversation about the life and some examples of how different our lives are. Again, we are starting a very difficult conversation, a conversation on race. And we urge our leaders in towns and cities, large and small, to have these constructive conversations. So I urge you, don't turn this into a political conversation, even though politics has a role to play. Why? Because real intentions often get lost in the law. So don't get lost in the political rhetoric. Yes, it's uneasy, it's uncomfortable. This coronavirus has taught us that we can change. Remember, our world taught us that we had to change in about a week to fight the virus and also keep living life. And we're still fighting the COVID-19 war. It only proves that we can do what is uncomfortable, hit the reset button, and move forward to what will be our new normal, if that's what we choose to do. Even if your response is to stand in the sidelines because saying something is uncomfortable. When we see or hear discrimination, don't just stand there. At least make a noise that says you're uncomfortable. You have that power. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, panelists, for being here. I'm going to now give an introduction of those panelists. And then at that point, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Lamont Breland. Raquel Carter, she's a principal broker with God Realty in Lexington, Kentucky. She's been licensed as a real estate agent since 2002. She's the owner of God Realty, and since 2007, principal broker of God Realty since 2013. During her real estate career, she's built her clientele and run her businesses based on core values of integrity, professionalism, and genuine care concern for others. God Realty's values community, diversity, and promotes a healthy work and balanced life. Their success is not only measured by sales, but by the impact they're able to make on the lives of those they serve. Alfonso Al Cornish. His background includes both public and private sector experience. As Chief Learning Officer, he led a regional healthcare learning organization to be recognized as one of the Training Magazine's top 125 training organizations in 2016, 17, 18, and 19. And I think at that point he retired. His extensive experience in leadership development, organizational change, and effectiveness, employee engagement, coaching, succession planning, diversity, and inclusion. There's much more, but I'll stop with that. Jay Gooley. Jay is a managing broker for Kentucky Select Realty, Kentucky Select Properties. A licensed real estate agent since '94, Jay joined Kentucky Select in 2005 after successful roles in marketing, brand management, communications for both large and small organizations. As a Kentucky Select sales associate, Jay has advised clients in sales and purchase of residential properties throughout Metro Louisville. He closed more than 81 million transactions from 2006 to 2019. And as a managing broker, he's responsible for the Kentucky Select brand and overseeing marketing, sales, agent development, operations for the company and its 80 real estate agents. Curtis Owens is a member of the Greater Louisville Association of Realtors, an associate with the Breland Group, and has been a full-time realtor since 1992. He's currently president-elect of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, NAREB, in Louisville. Previously, Mr. Owens served as vice president of NAREB and is currently the membership chair. He was previously a general manager in the restaurant industry for several chains, a graduate of WKU in business, and holds an associate degree in real estate. Then joining us is Carter Martin Jr., team leader for the Ignite, a group with Simmons Realtors. Carter Martin Jr. is a full-time, full-service broker associate and team leader, again, with the Ignite group. Carter Martin Jr. was initially licensed in 2014 and received his brokerage license in 2018. He is a 2019 graduate of the Greater Louisville Leadership Institute and currently serves as a delegate for Kentucky Realtors. Justin Langdon, CEO, Lexington Bluegrass Association of Realtors. Again, Justin serves as the CEO and FLBAR. Immediately prior to this, he was vice president of government affairs for the San Antonio Board of Realtors. He spent over 10 years working in the United States Congress before becoming a part of the Realtor family. He's a graduate of the University of California, Santa Barbara, and grew up in a multi-generational realtor family. He has served realtor organizations at the state and national level and enthusiastically brings his breadth of experience to the local community there at Elbar. So we're thankful for each of you. We appreciate you serving. We also have our CEO, Steve Stevens, on board with us today. And so with that, Lamont, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership throughout this this season of just changing times, COVID-19 and on it goes. So thank you, Lester. And thank you to our panelists for being here, and thank you, Kentucky Realtors, for tuning in. I want to start off with Carter Martin Jr. Carter, you and I have become pretty close here over the last several months. You serve on our COVID-19 Presidential Advisory Group. And you and I we were talking as a group the other day, and you made a statement that has resonated with me, and I've actually shared it with several folks as we start the discussion, just around the water cooler, so to speak. And you asked us on that call, you said, let me ask you guys a question. How many of you all have ever had the police called on you just for showing a property? How many people have had someone say to you, excuse me, can I help you? As if to say, why are you in this neighborhood? Why are you at this house? Can you expand on that a little bit and just share with us what that looks like?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to serve President Lester and Lamont on this presidentially group. And yeah, it's just what you said. You know, it's a question to ask yourself just to open up the door into our world. You know, and the question was quite simply, have you ever had the cops called on you while showing a house just simply because they don't think you belong there? And that has happened to members of my team, Ignite Property Group. That has happened. I have never had the police called on me, but I've had several neighbors always come over in certain neighborhoods just to see, hey, why are you here? Can I help you? I'm always wearing a name tag. I always keep my realtor R in the windshield of my car. I always have on some sort of logo wear. So it should always be apparent that I'm a real estate agent, that I'm a realtor here in Kentucky, serving our community. But those types of things happen to us, and to say they happen for any other reason other than the color of our skin, I'd be lying to myself, you know. So I asked the panel, who was mostly made up of white realtors, has this happened to you? And nobody in that group could raise their hand to say that's happened. So it's certainly something that, you know, needs to be discussed with open conversation, and so that we can start to work towards a better environment.
Absolutely. Justin, Landon, you know, as the CEO of basically 3,500 independent contractors who are your members, how can your organization or any organization demonstrate I guess, a commitment to equality and diversity? What does that look like? How do you do that?
Well, thanks for the question, Lamont, and again, thanks for the invite today. I'll start by talking about what we did yesterday, which is I didn't think it was an option for our association to stay silent. And to the point that Lester made to lead us off is we felt it very important that we must make a statement, an official statement as an organization saying that what we stood for. And we issued that statement yesterday, I guess on Tuesday, and proudly stand behind it. And that was the beginning of what I hope is a commitment by our organization to lead into this conversation around diversity and inclusion. And it's something that we have done a lot of talking about over the last few years. For example, at all of our recent leadership retreats, we've done diversity and inclusion training for our leadership. So we've done a lot of talking, right? But I think as an organization, it's time for us to do more than talk, and we need to take some action. So for us, it's how do we look in the mirror and say, we need to figure out a way to make sure that our organization reflects the community that we serve. And do we have enough people from diverse backgrounds serving at all levels of the organization? That goes for committees. It certainly goes for leadership. I think our first president of color was, our first and only president of color was 14 years ago, Bobby Johnson. And we haven't had one since, and I think that's a failure of the organization, and we need to do better. And so to that end, we're going to stand up a diversity and inclusion task force. We're sending out an email today scheduling that first meeting, which will be very much an open dialogue with our membership to figure out how we solve that problem and how do we become a better. And I believe very strongly that if we have more realtor representation from diverse communities, we will create a community of more diverse homeowners, which is a tremendously beneficial thing. It's all systemic. We need to have more diverse lenders. It's the pillars hold up the house together, and we need everything working together. And so we want to be part of that solution.
Great, thanks, Justin. You know, I know several months ago I had a conversation with Curtis Owens, who's one of my dear friends and agents, and he has made the comment to me, I don't expect you to understand something that you've not experienced. So Raquel, I want to ask you, kind of as maybe we've alluded to, sometimes we feel like we can sympathize, but you know, as white people, as realtors, I mean, we really can't because we've not really experienced the type of thing that Curtis talked about. as a realtor leader and a principal broker yourself, are there any examples that come to mind that maybe you've encountered or heard of that may be unique to people of color?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you again for including me. I do. I have a core group here. I have a staff of 15, including 13 realtors. Of our 13 licensed realtors, 11 of them are African American. And I will tell you that we have different conversations. Just as Carter mentioned, you know, there are things that we have to be careful about, that we have to consider when we go out, and I'm sad to say it is more for my African American male counterparts than it is some for our female. We have some issues that we have to address as women anyway. But there's things, I guess the part that's difficult to discuss without having, you know, without actually having the experience, is that we have to always consider these things. So having the conversation about race is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for us as it is for our white counterparts. But the thing is that we don't have the option. And I think that's what my realtors face on a daily basis. And that's what I face as a business owner, that everything I do, everything I put out, I have to be conscientious about how it looks, you know, how people are going to perceive us. And I'll give you an example. I just recently spoke to a realtor that was considering switching brokerages. And he came to me, he talked to, you know, we had a good conversation, and he confided in me. He said, well, I looked on your website. And I said, oh, well, that's an African-American company. And he was not African-American. And it's something that I have to deal with, in that, yeah, we are African-American. We're wonderful realtors. We're professional. We work with, our clientele is diverse. But, you know, we had to, it's almost as a stigma that was given to us, that as a negative. It wasn't said in a positive light. And I look at all my white counterparts, and they never have to do that. You know, that's not anything they ever have to consider. Every picture I see of all my friends in their brokerage firms, I mean, they could be all white, and no one's ever going to look at them and say, oh, maybe I can't do business with them because they're all white, or, oh, I'm not going to, because we're used to that. We're used to that as the majority. So it's a balance. It's just a balance that we have to address as we move forward.
Great. That's something that most people have never really looked at it through that lens. Al, let me ask you, Raquel talks about her company and talking about being looked at differently, maybe because most of her agents are one color or the other. What role does company culture play in diversity?
I think company culture is really critical. And I'm going to go back to a little bit of what Raquel said. As an African-American man, every interaction that I have, what happens is you almost have to convince people that you're almost competent. No matter how successful you are, and no matter how many accolades or awards or recognition you've received, every interaction you have to start from ground zero and getting them to believe that as an African-American man or an African-American female, that you're competent. And that's a heck of a burden for us to carry. But an organization's culture is critical. And I think that's why some of the things that you're doing and you're talking about are critical to the success of an organization to grapple with some of these issues, because Raquel's right and Carter's right. These are very difficult issues to talk about, even for someone who's an African American. But in order to accomplish it, you must create the kind of culture that allows people to talk about these things in an environment that's not threatening, but that's in a constructive manner and is designed to help to resolve the issues. Because in many organizations, there's systemic racism. And breaking down systemic racism is not easy, but organizations can put in place a number of different ways to address the systemic racism in the organization. I'll give you just a couple. And I love what I heard Justin say, and in conversations with Lester about the forming of what I call a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. And that is a group of individuals that help the organization to define its strategy around dealing with these particular issues. The second is, inside of that, allowing individuals to form what we call either affinity groups or employee resource groups, so that they can work together to help the organization to move forward. And then inside of that, so that you create common language inside of the organization, offering diversity, equity, and inclusion training of all sorts. Two that really come to mind are cultural competency training, so that you understand the cultures of all individuals. And the second is unconscious bias, because we all have unconscious bias, whether we want to admit it or not. So those are some things that from a cultural standpoint that can be done to help to move the culture in the right direction.
So Al, just to follow up on that, because unconscious bias, is that racism? Because I think it sounds like everybody has it, but probably that's the dirty little secret nobody would ever want to admit publicly.
Well, it is racism when it relates to you having issues with people of certain race and ethnicities. Then it becomes racism. But otherwise, we all have certain biases. You know, I'm not afraid to admit that I have biases. Sure. But as long as it's not directed to one particular group, that's something different. That's racism.
Got it. Makes sense. Jay Gulick, we are old colleagues and friends, and you have so I'm familiar with your company, very well respected in the Louisville metro area, maybe the largest independent company. As a leader at Select, are there any hurdles or even victories that you've encountered with regard to promoting a culture of diversity and equality within your company?
Thank you, Lamont, and thanks to Lester for the invitation. And I appreciate being among all you other distinguished panelists and this great crowd. Yeah, I would say the first thing for me when talking about leadership around the topic of race is I really try to approach it with a certain amount of humility. To what Carter said to kick off the conversation, you know, there's so much that as a white man I'll never have to experience or know, and so from the standpoint of trying to approach things from a standpoint of humility has been helpful. But I'll just talk about a specific example in our company that happened about a little over 2 years ago in March of 2018. I was sitting at my desk and I got an email from a friend of mine who said, "Did you see Facebook?" And I hadn't checked Facebook. I'm not on it that often, but I do have an account because I try to monitor what's going on and people say about the company. But it turned out that one of our agents, not a particularly active agent, but an agent had posted something racist and offensive on Facebook that she thought was a private group, which then was picked up. And, you know, one of the silver linings for me, at least, from a very awful situation was that it was picked up and it was, the remark was shared by a woman named Sadiqa Reynolds, who is the CEO and the president of the Urban League of Louisville. And I don't know if any of you all have met or know Sadiqa, but she is one of the most impressive, capable human beings I've ever had the fortune of meeting in my life. And so after I discovered that this agent had made this comment, Sadiqa and I have a friend in common, Stephen Riley, who had tried to develop the food port in West Louisville. And I reached out to Stephen to get Sadiqa's contact information. And I called Sadiqa and told her how embarrassed I was and that I didn't feel like this reflected Kentucky Select's company or our culture or what we try to do as an organization. And she let me have it. You know, basically, you know, what she said to me that sticks with me to this day is, you know, I knew about you and I knew about your company and I thought you all were one of the good guys. And so the short story is that situation, that agent we ended up parting ways with that agent. But it really caused us as an organization and me personally to look at our company and what we were doing or not doing proactively to address topics of race at Kentucky Select. And, you know, I think a really difficult thing, if you've ever been on the other side of a nasty social media situation, I mean, there were people commenting from all over the country who had no experience with us, didn't know any of our agents personally, had no idea what we had done in the community. I mean, we were a very philanthropic organization, and that's something that we've hung our hat on for 15 years. But it didn't matter in that moment. We had lost all credibility with everybody. And I didn't sleep for about 4 nights because I was sick about it. But I think, you know, the thing that happened is, you know, I sat down and Lester reached out to me. I had a good conversation with Lester. I talked to a lot of people, including Sadiqa. And, you know, at that moment in time, we did not have one single Black person or person of color in our company. And to look at to think that you had been doing a good job and we're proud of what you had done as an organization and that people had been successful and you'd given back to the community, but faced with that very stark truth when you looked at the company picture, that it was a sea of white faces, that was sobering for me. Mm. And so what I will say, and I hope this tracks with the humility statement, is it is a work in progress for us as a company. We have 2 Black agents now, which is not as many as I want to have, but it's better than it was 2 years ago. And one of the things I'm still struggling with is I would love to have NARAB or NAR, KYR, or GLAR do some sort of survey with Black agents and agents of color to talk about what are the barriers that you feel like exist to be successful in this business that can be shared with all of the brokers, so we can hopefully have a positive dialogue around that. And sorry, Lamont, I'm taking a lot of time to answer your question.
Perfect.
But
no, it's a great story.
I do want to, there is to me a bit of a silver lining in that instance from that social media encounter a little over 2 years ago. When I sat down and talked with Sadiqa one-on-one, and we had a very candid conversation about a lot of things. But I said to her that day, I said, what can I do? What can Kentucky Select do to help? And that was in the very early stages of them announcing the development of the Louisville Urban League Sports and Learning Complex, which at that point was a 24-acre contaminated site in West Louisville at the corner of 30th Muhammad Ali. And Sadiqa said, I need to raise $45 million in 2 years to get this done. And she said, you need to help me raise this money. And so for the better part of the last 2 years, and I have been a very small piece, I've been on the development committee with an incredible group of people, Alice Houston, Ryan Bridgman, Christy Brown, Carla Deering, Val Jones, Jim Host, who helped with the Yum Center. So I've been a very small piece of the puzzle, but I don't know how many people saw the news yesterday, but Humana committed to giving basically the final $6.5 million to completing that project. We broke ground in the fall, and it will be open in 2021, and it will be an incredible catalyst for economic development. It is a black-led project in a predominantly Black neighborhood that will benefit Black-owned businesses and Black homeowners whose properties I think will appreciate around that site. So I can't imagine that there'll be anything else I do professionally in my life that I will be prouder of than the work that we've done on getting that project done. So that's the silver lining in having that initial very difficult conversation with Sadiqa to where we are today. But again, there's so many things we still need to do as a company and as a community to address some of the inequities that exist. But the fact that we're having these conversations now is, I think, incredible. And I want to be part of it.
Well, it sounds like that experience may have been one of the best things that ever happened to your company and to you personally. And kudos to you on your leadership on the way you handled it. Curtis Owens, let me ask you, I alluded to it earlier. You and I have talked not as much as we should, perhaps, on the conversation, but we've had some pretty good conversations over the years. And you have consistently come back to the theme of what it's like to raise an African-American son in this culture, and some of the experiences that you and your family have endured over and over. Do you think it's gotten any better, or has it actually gotten worse?
Well, Lamont, things have not gotten better, obviously, because we wouldn't have all the demonstrating in the streets that we have today. There's still problems that exist. There's still things that have to be addressed. And I'm glad we have these talking points that we have today. But a lot of it stems from not knowing, as I was saying before, is not knowing. Most people do not know history. Most people do not know Black history, primarily because Black history is not taught in schools. It's not taught in the public school. So you don't know. If you don't seek to find out yourself, there's no way of you knowing. I was fortunate enough to have a teacher that taught me Black history back in middle school. He was a white teacher. He thought I should know. And from that, I was able to build upon that. Even though it was never taught in public schools, I learned a lot. There's a lot to be learned. And once you know the history, once you know why we are where we are today, it helps to understand a lot of things. Even if you're ethnocentric, if you just deal with your culture totally and don't deal with any other cultures, you can kind of figure it out once you understand the history. And I'm gonna recommend the book for everybody so that they can begin to understand the history. It's a book by LaRon Bennett, and it's called Beyond the Mayflower. Beyond the Mayflower by LaRon Bennett Jr. And it's a book that's been around, but it teaches you the history. You'll learn Black history if you read that book, and you'll be a wiser person and be able to understand a lot more than you could understand today. Yes, it was difficult for me to tell my sons. I had to have the talk. I never had to talk about the birds and the bees with my sons, but I had to give the talk about when you go out there and encounter the police. I had to have that talk with them so my sons will be still around, because I know all the encounters that I've had. And I think I'm a pretty law-abiding guy. I pretty much stay on the straight and narrow, but I've been locked up, and I've had guns to my head. I've had guns pointed at me, and I got locked up for not having, because I couldn't show my proof of insurance. I had insurance, but I couldn't find the proof of insurance. Found out it was in the backseat of my car, but nonetheless, I got locked up and was in the jail for 24 hours. I taught my sons, keep your hands on the steering wheel. And it's a shame I had to teach them that, but I had to teach them, keep your hands on the steering wheel, watch what you say, watch what you do. We have to do all that. Still, my sons encountered the things that I knew that they would. My son has had 12 police officers with guns pointed at him, thinking he was somebody else. My other son, the same encounters. Almost everybody I know has had encounters with the police. And most people I know are like Carter Martin and Lester Sanders. They're good guys, but they still have had their encounters, too many encounters, too many close encounters. In college, I got a gun pointed at my head by the police on campus police. I mean, it's just an ongoing thing that you don't think about if you don't have to experience it. But once you experience it, you have to think about it. The thing is we talk about that, there's a few bad apples on the police force, and the police force is built of mostly good guys. And I believe that. I believe it's mostly good guys that are trying to do their job, trying to be law-abiding and take care of our community. But guess what, guys? We can't have a few bad apples. We can't have a few bad apples. Those seems like those few bad apples roll around a lot. But we can't have a few bad apples. We can't have an airline. If you had an airline told you we have a lot of good pilots, but we got a few bad ones. They crash in the mountains sometimes. You wouldn't want to get on that airline, wouldn't you? Nope. Just the same, we can't have a few bad cops. And I am so proud of the young people that are stepping out today that have been peacefully protesting. I'm so proud of the ones that's going out peacefully protesting. And what's so different about this than the protests that I've seen in the past, in the 60s and the 90s, is the protests are Black kids, white kids, brown, yellow. They're of every ethnic group. And that's what I'm so proud of, because Black people we can't change anything with the 12% of us. We have to have allies to change it. If we don't have allies, nothing will ever change. And I'm so proud of this group. It looks like they mean business. And some things are already starting to change, but are they where they need to be now? Where they should be? Lamont, not yet. We have some work to do.
Let me open this up to the group. And thanks, Curtis, for that. So, as a middle-aged white guy, we tend to have things that we say that are probably not appropriate, but we don't realize it. Things like, well, all lives matter. Things like, I'm sorry. Things like, what can I do to help? And I have found over the last week or two, as I've studied and researched and tried to figure it out myself, there are certain things that we're just ignorant on. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know. Am I correct there? I mean, are there things that we shouldn't be saying, or things that we should be doing better?
Lamont, let me speak on just very briefly, and I speak for myself. I don't attempt to speak for everyone, but on the Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter situation, you have to think of it from a standpoint of, I have a body as a whole, right? Head to toe, I have a body. And I like to think all parts of my body matter to me. Can't walk without my feet, can't eat without my hands, my mouth, can't hear without my ears, can't see without my eyes. They all matter. We know they all matter. But if I fall off my bicycle and I get a deep laceration to my hand, right? My knees may be scraped up. My arm might be scraped up. I might have a bruise on my head, but I'm bleeding out of my hand. When the doctor asks me what's wrong, I'm not going to say anything about the scrape on my knee or that my ears are ringing. My hand is bleeding. So you have people that are saying my hand's bleeding. Black Lives Matter. We're hurting, right? It doesn't mean that all lives don't matter. Okay, we're not saying, my daughter, many of you may have seen a video that she put out, 18 years old. I'm so hurt that I can't protect my kids from this world, right? But she made a statement in her poem. She does spoken word, 18 years old. She said, when we yell Black Lives Matter, we're not yelling Black Lives Matter because all lives don't matter too. We're yelling Black Lives Matter because we wish you knew. Okay? And she's way more artistic than me, but I get that. And I hope that other people can get that. It's a slap in the face when someone says Black Lives Matter and the very first thing out of your mouth is all lives matter. Well, we know that. Well, we know it should matter anyways, right?
Right.
But just remember that analogy. Right now, you have a set of people who are hurting, who are going through things that you as white people can't understand. And the last thing we need is someone downplaying our pain. If my kids are hurting, I'm going to hug the kid that's hurting. Doesn't mean I don't love my other 3 kids, right? I tell them all they're my favorite in their ears, but they really truly all are my favorite, right? So when I'm hugging one child to comfort them, to let them know that I'm hearing them, that I know they're in pain, it doesn't mean I don't love my other children. So that's just that small little piece that I hope that you can hear on the problem of when we say Black Lives Matter, we're not saying you don't matter too. We just want you to hear us because obviously we're feeling like we don't matter. So that's my piece of that.
Great analogy. Anybody else?
Come in. If we bring this back full circle to housing, to real estate, what we do, realtors that have shown houses, I would ask most of you, like, how often have you ever shown a house in a neighborhood that was a decent house that was within your client's price? Neighborhood to many white people. It doesn't happen. But there's lots of neighborhoods or areas where the people, buyers will say, no, I don't want to look at those houses, or I don't want to be in that neighborhood because it's too many Black people, or it's got a bad reputation because of that. And they could be nice neighborhoods, and they could be well-kept houses, and they're the houses that are within their budget, that they can afford. But I've also seen, with both my Black and white counterparts, to be honest, I've seen realtors make those decisions. I know, I don't mean to get into redlining and those things from the past, but they were systematic, but they are also internal. So when we pull houses for our clients, and we look, sometimes I've heard realtors decide not to show clients a particular house. Well, these people are moving from in town, moving from out of town. They clearly don't know this is this type of neighborhood. Let me just take that off the list. So the companies and with other realtors, I've heard that being said. So I try to be really conscientious. I'm not going to make that decision for a client. And I tell that to my realtors all the time, like, you can't make these decisions for them. If they ask me a question specifically, I tell them to drive through the neighborhood. You have to drive by. You have to decide if it's somewhere you want to live. But in my mind, I know that sometimes it's still a deciding factor for them.
Right. Good. Anybody else on that topic?
Lamont, if I may, I'll share two things. One is, to Raquel's point, I actually had somebody report to the MLS not too long ago a situation where in our MLS there's a field for directions, right, where you can type in how to get to a property, which to some degree seems a little outmoded today, considering we can quickly find the location of anything by typing it into our phone. But it is still a widely used field, right? Like, turn left here after this street. And this agent had observed that a lot of properties that were listed along Martin Luther King Boulevard were saying CGPS, right? That as though they didn't want to, list the streets around which that property may be located, and thus discourage people from going to look at it, right? It was just CGPS because they didn't want necessarily to see that particular street identified as the direction. Now, whether that was the motivating factor or not, the fact that somebody took the time to observe all those different properties and observe that trend was disturbing to me. And that's an example perhaps of like this very hidden and yet also very systemic challenge that we have within our profession. The second piece about us needing to educate ourselves as white people, I think something that I've been blessed by is lots of really good friends who have helped educate me about my unconscious biases. And I've been blessed to be able to engage in those conversations, much as Jay has been able to, that he described earlier. But I also think we need to be really careful of not turning to our Black friends and saying, teach me how to be better, right? It's not really your job. And Toni Morrison had a great quote that she once said, where she said, she said, if the only way for you to be tall is to have someone on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And I believe white people have a problem and they need to figure out how to fix it. Leave me out of it. And that's not to say that there's not a role to play, but I think we as white leaders and white community members, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves. And I've taken that very seriously myself, and Lord knows I have a long way to go. But it is something that I care a lot about, and I hope that and it's something that I will insist on my friends and colleagues that they do the same. And so I think that's our responsibility.
Kind of along that line, Justin, are there any tools perhaps at NAR or, because you look at, I think we have 1,400 brokers in the state. Most of them are small companies, 6 or less maybe. I wonder if there are any tools out there, resources where people want to get better, they don't have to just Google things, where they can find things that that are maybe accurate and up to date.
Yeah, you're teeing me up here, Lamont. So I'll say that this has been a hobby horse of mine. I actually serve on a diversity task force, the National Association of Realtors, where we're actively discussing this topic, because as an organization, we have devoted an immense amount of resources to political action, right? We've devoted immense amount of resources to professional development and other things like that, and yet we have not dedicated nearly the same number of resources to this conversation. And so as part of this work group that I'm on, we have been specifically asking for tool sets to make available to local associations. You know, and most of our associations across the country are smaller. They don't necessarily have the staff or the resources to get into these really difficult topics. So we are asking NAR, and I'm part of the committee that's trying to put together some of those tools because we see a real need. And a great example is the National Association of Realtors has largely said to associations across the country, you will have a government affairs committee, right? Well, it might be time for them to say you will have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, as Al framed it earlier. And frankly, I'm an advocate for that, and I think it's something that we should have as part of the core standards of our organization that requires local associations to think about this stuff.
So Al, I know you, I think I know this. You're going to be working, or maybe you currently are working, with KYR to some degree. Is that accurate? I hope.
That is correct.
Okay. So what is your, what is it that you all do over at Culture Docs, and how's that going to play into what maybe Kentucky Realtors are doing?
Well, we're going to be doing two things. We do a bunch of other things, but these are two of the things that we'll be doing with Kentucky Realtors. The first is we will be doing a session on diversity with the board, so that they have a greater level of awareness, and also we'll take them to that next step in terms of some actions that they can take to really address some of the issues that we're talking about. So we'll do some work around that. The second thing that we're going to be doing is we'll be working on the strategic plan. And of course, what we're talking about, I hope will be a part of that strategic plan, that there will be at least one goal that will be directed towards this effort, because I think the thing that's most critical is that what happens often in this country is that we have a spark. Mm-hmm. We have a situation, and what happens is after 3 or 4 months, it kind of goes away. Well, part of the issue is because we don't have an ongoing plan and an ongoing strategy to address those issues. So what I'm suggesting, and will be suggesting, is that you have some ongoing strategies to address this. And this, I think, has been just absolutely wonderful in terms of conversation. Now, what I'll also encourage you to do is to continue the dialogue, because you have the dialogue once, you need to continue to have it, because I think that will help all of your members to better understand some of the issues and the challenges that are facing Black people.
To your point, one of my agents who is African American, she's in a unique position because her husband is a retired LMPD officer, and he's African American. But so I called her just to talk the other day, and she said, to your point, she says, this cannot be a moment, it needs to be a movement. And I think that's going to be the struggle as the weeks and months pass, is to make this a movement. Yeah. Any thoughts on that from anybody on the panel?
I guess I'm sort of on this panel right now, Lamont.
You are.
Again, I appreciate all the openness and the comments. And I think as we look in the chat box, there are a lot more questions that are coming. But again, I think as we talk about the task force, that's going to be extremely important. And it doesn't address just Black and white. It addresses all races, all nationalities, because when we look across the state of Kentucky, and that's what I'm looking at right now. There are a lot of groups that are not represented.
Mhm.
I call and I talk to some of the Hispanic realtors, and they're left out too. They feel very much left out, and you don't, most of the time, they're not represented on our boards, they're not represented on our committees. And so that's an internal change that we have to figure out how to fix and work through. I walked in one day and into KYR, and I saw several Asian realtors. And that was difficult for me as I introduced myself to figure out, where are they? What have we done to make sure that they feel welcome? And I'm not calling out the association. I'm saying we as a whole. What have we done to make sure that we bring them into the fold, make them feel comfortable and welcome? And so sometimes the most important thing to remember is to have a friend, you've got to be a friend. And we have to reach out across the lines and just extend and shake your hands. This movement that we're dealing with here, I don't care what anybody says, it is different already. I went to the post office this morning. I live in Prospect. As I'm coming back home, people are protesting. They've been saying that it's going to happen in Prospect on next door. Well, it was. It was all white. There were kids, mothers. I shouldn't say all white because there were also, it was Hispanic as well. So it was difficult for me to just pass it up. As a matter of fact, I turned around and went back and just shook their hands and said, thank you for doing this, but what made you do that? And how did you get the group together? And they said, we just felt like a lot of people do right now, that we wanted to do something different, that we wanted to be a part of the solution. And I'm thinking, you've got kids, elementary kids, middle school, high school, all of them out there marching to make a difference. I walked up, they gave me a Black Lives Matter sign. It's like, oh, okay. They handed me a sign that says, no more injustice. Those were the signs that they were carrying. So we have to continue to educate ourselves, but we also need to make sure that we talk to those close to us. If we've got teenage kids and they've got friends, they've got feelings and emotions too. But I offer myself always for anyone to pick up the phone, give me a call, have a conversation. I don't have all the answers. I have lived a life, and we live in a place called life where a lot of things happen, but I'm always available for a conversation. But again, this conversation, if you notice, I said early on, it's the beginning. And this is the start. And we have to continue the conversation, but conversation can't be alone. There has to be committed action and change that we're committed to. And again, if we choose to sit on the sidelines and watch, then that's on us individually. But
So,
I gotta tell you, it's important that you don't. And oftentimes just getting started is the hardest thing. It's how do I start? I think Jay would say after a second, you just do it. I remember shortly after Jay and I having that conversation, something else had happened in the city. And I was standing on the courthouse steps and Jay was there as well. And we were there in the rain. Mm-hmm. But you have to make a difference in the community if you really want to see change.
Lamont, if I could chime in for a minute there. The conversation, these things are wonderful, but it is just like Lester said, I feel like it's the start. I have a group that works with me on my marketing, and just as everyone did, and Justin, you guys released a great statement. They called me and contacted me and asked me, do you want to release a statement? And my exact words were, why? why do I need to make a statement? You know, I feel like we are a statement, you know, so, and not in a kind of thing, you know, a cocky manner, but it's my intention to live it out every day. So my hope is that these conversations are the start, you know, they're a spark to the actions that follow, because we can continue to talk about it. But if we look the same, if we move forward the same, then it just becomes exhausting. It just becomes a weight on your heart that every day you have to walk up and have these conversations, when instead we could do something. And the do something is, I think it's easier than we make it. You know, you need to welcome other people into your companies. You need to look at other people that are different, but treat them the same. You know, it's like you want to acknowledge that they're different. The colorblind thing, Lamont put that on your list. We talked about it for years. I don't want anybody to be colorblind. We're all beautiful colors, but I want you to look at me, see my color, and say, that's okay. You know, I accept them anyway, or because I think my color is awesome. So those are just things that, you know, we want to press forward on, the actions, the small actions that will add up to, you know, just the attitudes that we have towards each other.
Yes.
Good. Raquel, it's funny that you
Could I
say
just-
that. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's here today speaking up about racism, especially if you're a person of color. I really appreciate that this is here and this group has started. I really tried to push it on social media. I wish there were more realtors here, but I just wanted to say something to continue off of Al Cornish and Raquel Carter. It is not your duty as a person of color to educate other white people. It's our duty as white people who are privileged to educate other white people about racism. People of color have so much weight on them right now. We as white people need to take the weight off of them and educating other white people and educating our own. I think that's super important, and I appreciate that you guys are speaking out about your experiences. You didn't have to do that. It holds so much weight. And it's amazing that you're strong enough to do so. But I just want to say that to my other fellow white realtors, is that we have a lot of work to do as a privileged party, and people of color have so much more that they're dealing with. If there's one thing that we can do, we need to talk to each other about racism and how it's not okay.
Thank you, Noah.
And I always think that the easiest thing to do is, tonight around the dinner table, share the conversation that we just had today. When you meet up with some of your colleagues and your friends, share the conversation. And someone said to me once, they said, Al, how do I do it? Because I find it difficult. I said, it's not as difficult as you might think. You have to take the first step and to say something. And you will find that you will find more allies, because we all have more in common than we have difference. We have more in common than we have difference. And once you start to talk to people, you start to understand that I'm just the same as you in many respects. I like the same things. I want to do the same things. I want the same things for my kids and my grandkids that you want. But you have to start the conversation. You have to start it somewhere.
Can I just follow up real quickly with something? Both Al's point and Noah's point. I had a really interesting conversation with a friend of mine who owns a small business in town yesterday, a white guy. And I think one of the things that's been really hard is, at least from the white perspective, is people are so afraid of saying the wrong thing that they avoid the topic altogether. And I honestly think that the silence may be worse than saying the wrong thing. I mean, this is the time to initiate the conversations.
Great point. Great point. Anybody else? Raquel, it's interesting that you made that comment, because I mean, not 3 hours ago, one of my agents came in to pick up a commission check, and we kind of started the discussion a little bit, and she said exactly what you said, and she didn't mean it negatively, but she said, I guess I'm just colorblind. I don't get it. And so what I what I tried to do, and trust me, I'm not good at it, but I used a couple of the stories that Carter had given me and that Vonda, my agent, had given me over the last few days that just really resonated with me. And I think these analogies that you all have used, I've heard the one that Carter used about the bicycle. I've heard the one about the, if there's one house on fire in a neighborhood and the fire department comes out and focuses all their attention on that house, doesn't mean that they don't think that the rest of the houses don't matter. To be able to use some of those stories, it works. I mean, it seems to work. And people start to say, never thought of it like that. And then one other thing I want to touch on, because I don't know, to me, it's kind of been a 4-letter word, even though it's only 2 letters. But it's come up a couple times in the chat here. And I know Curtis has educated me on white privilege. Does anybody want to take a stab at, in about a minute or so, what white privilege is?
Well, if you don't mind, Lamont, I'll address it briefly. Of course, I'm not white, but I understand that there's certain privileges that white people have that black people do not have. And a lot of times white people have those privileges and they don't realize they have them because it's just everyday life. It's just everyday things that they do, that they have, that they experience. And they think that's just life. But they don't understand that they have certain privileges that black people don't experience. And Lamont, just you being a tall white man is a privilege for you. You can go in the same place I can go in and you'd be treated differently in certain aspects. Mm-hmm. Just because you're a tall white. I used to be a manager. When I was a manager, I was a general manager. And when the purveyors would come in, they come in and they wouldn't think I was a general manager because it was a tall white man that worked for me. And they would go to him and talk to him and try to do business with him. He said, I'm not the boss. There's the boss over there. Mm-hmm. And, but automatically, they thought he was the boss. But there's certain things that we cannot get access to because we don't have the privilege that white people do. And white people have to address that with each other and explain what that privilege is. They have to understand what that privilege is. And part of that is understanding, as I said, understanding history, understand why we are where we are today. Mm-hmm. Why, how did we get to where we are today? And that'll explain a lot of it once you find that out, how we got to where we are today.
The most poignant example I can think of is I have 2 sons, one who's 14 and one who's 19. And anytime they leave the house in the car, my white privilege is I don't worry that they're going to end up like Trayvon Martin or Tamir Rice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. Good point. So we have a question over here from Keith Buckner. He said, could anybody on the panel talk about the importance of not just having, let's say, more realtors on our in our company or realtors as members of our association, but how do we groom those folks of color for leadership positions, both within our companies and within our association?
Well, Lamont, I'll say when I was licensed in 2014, I think Lester said that, and I spoke to several brokerages, but eventually landed at Seminole Realtors for several reasons. But I'll have to say, honestly, when I walked in there and they give you the tour of the place, and it was spectacular. They have a soda machine, if you don't know. It was, I didn't see me, right? I didn't see me sitting at the desks. I didn't see me sitting in the offices. I didn't see me in any of the positions of manager. I didn't see me in any of the administrative assistants. I didn't see me in marketing anywhere. I saw, and this is initially, of course, I think everybody knows Lester Sanders is there and things like that, but this is initially, right? I didn't see me. And in fact, the first person I saw me in was in a business meeting. I saw a guy named Eric Speaks. I think he's on the call. But I didn't see me. So there was a level of uncomfortableness that we experience really a lot of places, right? Anytime we go to shop or eat or things like that, we experience these uncomfortableness, but we smile anyway. You know, we put on that smile and things. But if speaking to the companies on here that, you know, may be all white or anything like that, or even teams that are all white and groups, things like that, if you know, you want to be able to see yourself in some of these places, right? And so if you really truly have a desire to have a more diverse company or group, you have to have some people of color in those positions, right? You have to, because we're walking in and we're not seeing ourselves. And so, you know, I don't know what kind of music you like, but I like a little bit of everything. But I'll tell you, if I show up to a club or a bar or something and they're only playing, I don't know, heavy metal, I'm probably going to leave because I don't see myself there, right? So if you really want me as a patron, you have to allow us to see ourselves. It's crucially important for us to see other people of color in these positions. It is a blessing to me to see Lester Sanders as president of KYR, right? I was already starting to become active in our local association. But I won't tell you a lie. When I saw Lester Sanders leading and participating, it gave me some comfortableness that I can be there too. I see someone at the table that's like me, and I'm more comfortable to pull up my chair. So just when you're thinking about that in your business, just think, you know, can they see themselves? And that goes all ethnicities, okay? And so, but it's vastly important for people to be able to see themselves.
Good stuff. Anybody else?
And I would just say that one of the things as an organization that actively wants to encourage more diversity, I'm always very aware of the tokenism effect, which is where we were able to elevate one person and sort of say like, oh, our work's done, right? Like we mission accomplished. And that's why I made the comment earlier about the fact that we had a black president in 2006, Bobby Johnson, and we haven't had a person of color elevate to an officer position since. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe we haven't had a person of color on the board of directors until just this year, over those 14 years. So I may have missed somebody in there, but I think that's correct. And so we have to be very aware that we can't just identify one or two people and then sort of call it a day. It has to be a systemic solution that leads to a pipeline of people. And so we don't find ourselves, and I don't want to speak for Raquel's experience, but I can tell you that we did a leadership retreat a year and a half ago where we were doing diversity and inclusion training, and Raquel was the only person of color in the room. And I think that puts a burden on her that is unfair. We were tremendously blessed to have her there because she spoke up and did a tremendous job doing so, but it's unfair, right? We've got to make sure that we've created a system that ensures that we have broad representation and that we're not placing that burden on just one or two people. But to Keith's point in the chat, if we don't have leaders in the organization, we can't expect to have rank and file in the organization. That it takes both.
Good stuff. It's good to see my old friend and partner in crime, Patricia Edison, out there commenting. Hey, Patricia. And I think you probably just covered her comment of just whose responsibility is it to groom. You know, that's the hard part. And but I'll just say it's great to see. I know in the Louisville Association and in the State Association, folks like Eric Speaks and Carter and others that are in our leadership classes, and not just graduating, but actually running for offices, board of directors, committees, and things like that. I know I can see a change there, and it's not related to the recent events. So that at least that's a positive sign, I think, in the right direction. We're starting to run out of time here. We're over, but this is great conversation. Don't want to cut it off. Does anybody else have anything they want to bring up, something we've missed? Or, I think when we have these conversations, to the point earlier, just don't worry about saying the wrong thing, because just by showing up here on any of these forums, I think it shows where your heart is. Anybody else?
Well, I'd just like to say, Lamont, if you mind, that is a step in the right direction. We have moved ahead, because when I got in the real estate business, there were not enough Black realtors to even consider how many people are going to be in the room. There weren't that many people in the room. As a matter of fact, when I was in college, there were no Black realtors on the board of realtors. Miss Eleanor Foreman was the first one in 1972 to become a member of the board of realtors. So yeah, we've come a long way, even having enough Black realtors to even talk about serving in different aspects, and to see Lester Sanders as president is awesome.
Can you just talk? I don't know if a lot of people know what NARAB is. Can you give us an overview of what that is?
NARAB is the oldest trade association in the country, oldest Black trade association in the country. It started in 1947, and it's the association of Black realtors that went into being before Black people were able to be members of the board of realtors, of the National Association of Realtors. So before the National Association of Realtors, we were members of NARAB, and NARAB just continues to this day. And we fight for democracy in housing, and that's some of the things that we try to do to promote Black homeownership and Black wealth through real estate. And that organization still exists today, but like I said, we didn't have a means to even be on the Greater Louisville Association of Realtors until 1972. So yeah, it's great that we can have the conversation and talk about having people in different positions now, because when I got in the business, there was not enough people to do that.
Absolutely. Anybody else before we turn it back to Lester?
Hey, Lamont.
Yes, sir.
So I want to thank everybody here that spoke today on the panels. And this is hard for me because over the past few weeks, I've thought long and hard about this and where I come from. I come from Eastern Kentucky. I've been gone from there longer than I lived there, but I've got kids, younger kids, and growing up, they had friends of all races, all colors, all nationalities, and ethnicities and all this, and never thought a thing about it. But I look back and I think I am a little bit educated, and a lot of us on here are. Years ago, a couple decades ago, I was talking to somebody, a mentor, and about spiritual matters. And you have to understand, coming from Eastern Kentucky, there's one or two ways of thinking, and that's it. And what he convinced me and what he brought to my attention was that people don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, where I come from, I mean, if you look down from the sky on the region I'm from, you'd think it was the white cell at JCPenney or something, because you don't have what you have in Louisville and Lexington and other counties in this state or regions in the country. And I have a Black relative, and I guess maybe that made me a little bit more sensitive to things, but people don't know what they don't know. They don't know that, this privilege thing, the conversation and what I'm hearing here, it's enlightening, but a lot of people don't know they're privileged. A lot of people don't know that they're not supposed to think the way they're supposed to think. It still bothers me sometimes when I go home. I'm not talking about my family here, but just other little things, I hear disparaging comments, and it does bother me. But how do we get those pockets of the country and the state and our counties that are blanketed in one color or whatever? How do we reach that? That's just something, I know we can't answer that here, and I know we're running out of time, but I keep thinking, how can we reach people? This is a good start. What's going on in this country right now, this generation, I think will help us tremendously. And people, they don't know what they don't know. How do we get them to know the things that we need them to know?
Thanks for sharing that, Randy. And it sounds like maybe that's part of what Justin and NAR are kind of on their radar. In Kentucky, we've got 21 associations, and 3 of them make up probably 2/3 of our agents. So there's a whole state out there that maybe doesn't have the same access to things, or they don't see the world through the same lens, perhaps, as we do. So, well, thank you all for being with us today. It's been a great conversation, and let's keep it going. And thank you to our guests for being here, and thank you for what you all do for us, for our community, and we so appreciate that. Next Thursday, we're going to have Lee Brown on. She's a realtor and a speaker, and she's entertaining, but she's she's a good person, and I think she'll bring. I think she's going to talk about inventory and maybe some tools that realtors can use to get back out there and start beating down the bushes a little bit. So with that, Lester Sanders, Mr. President, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Again, if this conversation was uneasy, it hasn't been easy at all. It was uneasy for us as we talked about it in a PAG, and we've been together for 6 or 7 weeks regularly. Well, it was uneasy for us to have that conversation. So if you're uneasy, that's pretty normal too, because these are conversations, you know, as I grew up, I understood what my mama said, don't talk about money because we didn't have it. But then she also said, don't talk about race and don't talk about politics. But those are things that we have to talk about, particularly race. And somebody said this early, and this is the fact, we look at each other and we want to say we're all alike. No, we're all different. And that's what we have to learn. And that's what we have to appreciate. Everybody's different, but everybody brings something totally different to the table as well. And appreciate the differences and appreciate that you've got a friend that you can learn from. I commit from Kentucky Realtors. We've already got some of the people on the task force, and I've been getting names of people that want to serve on this task force. And so we've got a short time to do a lot of work, but this right here will be one of the first things that we do as we move forward to that task force. So please reach out to me, send me your emails, send me your calls, your texts, and I look forward for the opportunity for us to work together. Hopefully, we can be a model that we can assist the other associations as well. And not only locally, our local associations, but even if someone from across the country wants to know how we did it, even if another group that's not even a real estate group wants to know how we did it, we can at least be a shining star and let them see how we did it and how we took first steps, and then we move forward. I've already asked Justin to serve on the committee. I've asked some others as well, and I was grateful that he said yes without hesitation. And again, thanks each one of you. I have a relationship with everyone on this panel, not always by design, but life takes you that way. And so we're in this together, and I appreciate you coming forward to having that conversation, because your conversations were not easy either. And so, again, the last thing I'll leave is that much love to each one of you, and look forward to working with you as we continue to walk up this road.
Thank you all. Have a good week.